long hello. And we're ready to start. Welcome everybody. Thank you for being with us tonight. I'm Hilary Kunze, one of the associate curators of Cosmopolis 2. Just a quick note to say that the program tonight will be in English. So we're very happy to have tonight with us Yasmin Smith, one of the artists from the exhibition, and this is part of an ongoing series of artist talks with artists who are part of the project, and we will present each Thursday in the exhibition space, so I encourage you to check out the program and for the upcoming weeks. So Yasmin, one of the artists of the exhibition, originally from Australia, who works mostly with ceramics and really around questions related to ecological intelligence and memory embedded in ecology and natural elements or environments. Cosmopolis as a project first collaborated with Yasmin in 2018 for a project we presented in Chengdu in China, Cosmopolis 1.5, and then since this summer Yasmin has been in residency here in Paris to develop the project that is here exhibited, that is right behind you. It's Yasmin's installation, and to develop research around the basin of the Seine River and to develop the work that is part of the exhibition. So tonight her talk will of course discuss the methodology and the research that led to the development of this work, but also in general what her process, artistic research and process and interests are, and how this is somewhat inscribed or part of a larger series of works and of research that she developed, again, for Cosmopolis 1.5, but also for other works that were, for instance, exhibited in the 2018 Sydney Biennial. And I also wanted to let everybody know that very kindly, Yasmin will lead a ceramic workshop this upcoming Saturday. The workshop is free and open to the public and will take place at 11 a.m. again on Saturday at the Cité Internationale des Arts, which we thank very much for the partnership, the ongoing partnership in relation to Yasmin's residency. And before leaving the microphone to Yasmin, we also would like to thank the Australia Council for the Arts and the Parramatta City Council, thanks to which we are able to have Yasmin with us now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hilaria, and thank you for all being here. Thanks to the Cosmopolis team, Catherine, Charlene, and Lou, and all of the team in production that have put together this amazing exhibition, and I'm really happy to have been a part of this Cosmopolis and the previous Cosmopolis 1.5 in China. So yes, today I'm going to be talking about my work behind you there, which is a ceramic installation of ceramic forms that have been cast from plant specimens that I collected along different waterways, the River Seine, the River Marne, and the St. Denis Canal. And the work is a sort of an investigation of the chemical of the site. And I use plant material as a means to enter into trying to visualize the chemistry of a particular site by taking a plant specimen, making a ceramic cast, and then I burn the woods down to ash. And from the ash, I make a glaze, which I then furnish the outside of the pieces with. So everything on the wall is ceramic, and everything on the wall is plant or inorganic material left over from plants. So I arrived in Paris in July, and I started off in order to be able to collect wood and have access to different places and to sort of have some knowledge of the ecology of the riverways. I needed to collaborate with different people. So I firstly made a connection with an ecologist, and he works in the area of ecological consultation to try to remediate areas that have been affected by industrial activity or agricultural activity, so post-industry to clean up the sites and make them livable again for plants and animals. and humans. And through that connection, we explored the upper reaches of the River Seine, the Yonne and the Marne. And he also got me in contact with a group called Au Fil de l'Eau, who are a community organisation that run education tours on the River Marne, and they also clean the River of Wood around the camping island, which is not too far out of Paris, actually. There was also the issue of needing to find production spaces, kilns, ovens for firing of the work, and all these practical things when doing residency. And so I was very, very lucky to find a group of people that had a space in Meaux. And so I worked mostly out in Meaux to create the moulds of the plants and to do my glaze testing. And then from there, I moved to Duperrey School in Paris to fire the work, to pour and fire the pieces. And also I went to Burgundy and used a very big oven in a stoneware manufacturer that make the mild mustard jars. Through all of these collaborations and relationships, I was able to make the work. So I'm really thankful for all of that. And it helped me to gain a better understanding of the ecology of these areas and form connections, as I said, to be able to actually physically collect the wood. So yes, as I explained, the trees are burnt, and so from that ash, I'm able to create a glaze. And when you take the ash of the plant material, all that's left in the ash after you burn it is inorganic elements. So for example, in order for a tree to actually have life, it has to absorb all the essential nutrients from the soil. It takes oxygen and carbon and hydrogen from the air to breathe. And this process, coupled with the process of osmosis, the movement of water through the cell membranes in the root, the plant is able to take in macronutrients and micronutrients, things like nitrogen, phosphorus, magnesium, calcium, and then the metal elements that are a part of the trace elements of minerals such as iron, manganese, copper, boron, cobalt, and chromium, and then some of the more dangerous ones like cadmium is red to orange and yellows, cobalt is blue, copper is green in oxidation and red in reduction. Cadmium is yellow, but it's very poisonous, and then we don't use that in glazes anymore. And then there's other ones that aren't colouring, like lead, strontium and barium, and they might actually change colours. Zinc, for instance, if it's mixed with chromium, turns chromium from green to brown. Lead will make brighter colours, so it will create more vibrant colours to whatever it's added to. And strontium and barium also do that as well, and they also create a matte surface when they're put into a glaze. So trees' ashes, and like humans' ashes, are basically ready-made glazes. Although the melting point of ash is like 1,800 degrees. And so in order to form a glaze of that, the temperature needs to be reduced. And I do that through a triaxial blend. And this was the first time I made a wood ash glaze. I was really happy about it. So if you see in the top there, that would be 100% of wood ash, and then down where my hand is 100% of a flux material, which helps the ash to melt. And over on the other side, the BC is 100% of the type of clay. And you can use any clay you want, but I use non-colouring clays and fluxes to try to only have the ash be the colouring of the glaze. So you would have at the top there 100% wood ash, and then the next line down would be 80% wood ash. The next 3 spots down would be 60%, and the next 4 spots down would be 40 and 20 and 0. And you do this, you cross-blend it in this way with all the materials. And so this middle triangle is a crossbred of the triaxials of all 3 types. And I always choose this one. So I always use 60% ash in all of my glazes so that across the board, the research can be compared from one geographic location to another, one tree to another. And that way it's, the only variable, as I said, is the ash. Through this type of experimentation, I can create site-derived ceramic installations and glazes to explore the chemical information of a site. I collect the plant material from a particular site of interest in an attempt to furnish a type of glaze evidence of histories, ecologies, geology, culture of that place. And sometimes I source elements of the clay body from the site as well. This clay here is red clay that I collected in Sichuan province during my residency for Cosmopolis 1.5 last year. It's red because the Sichuan Basin is also called the Red Basin, and that name comes from its really, really rich iron soils and clays and sandstones, which is what this is. I also use, sometimes I use the community as participants in the production of work as well. And I do this to try to enact the kind of relationship between people and materials and history. And then it's also a good way to just open up a dialogue about, with the community that actually live in a particular location so that I can learn more about the site. And so this is a factory worker at the industrial ceramics factory that was my studio for Cosmopolis 1.5 in Jiajiang County. And they made teapots and teacups, which were exhibited as a part of the final installation. They made this from the red clay that you saw before, and then this was glazed with the ash of green tea plants that I had collected from neighbouring green tea plantations. For all of my projects, collaboration with the community is essential for the collection of the physical materials, the production of the work, finding ovens to fire the work, which can be difficult, studio space to build the work, and most importantly, collaboration for the exchange of knowledge and the perspectives and stories of the place. So I'm going to show you some previous works from around 2013 to now that have relevance to this work here. This image here is a morgue in Central Australia. It's in a community called Indaria, and its whitefellow name is Hermansburg in Central Australia. I went out there to work with a community of potters that wanted to build a scale replica of their mission church. So this is the morgue behind the church. This is the church. And that's a river red gum standing directly in front of the church there. So after a couple of months of building the replica of the church, I had been living inside a house, and surrounding the house was a fence that had been clad with river red gum branches. And to me, I wasn't sure whether it was decoration or a fortification and a sign of intimidation to want people to stay out or keep people in, I don't know. But I explored the elemental nature of the site and left those social questions as something that can be thought upon through the work. So the final installation that I produced was called Indaria Fence, and I collected the river red gum branches and made slip cast versions of those, and then I collected the ash from the cooking fire pits from behind the church. The rusted orange glaze of the branches is a response to the life of the trees. And this is just a little film that should show some aspects of the community and the fence line that I'm referring to. So the visuals of the original fence, visually the original fence and its protruding flora could be read as a kind of a social barrier of Indigenous and non-Indigenous inhabitants of the town. The house that I was living in was the school teacher's house, which is generally, school teachers are generally non-Indigenous, more so than less. And within the installation, the reproductions in ceramic form and ash glaze show the elemental nature of the town, so together forming a visualization of both elemental and social expressions. A good friend of mine, who was a writer and a curator, her name's Eleanor Ivory Weber, she came with me on one of my road trips to Undaria. And she wrote a catalogue essay for the exhibition. And she said, state can be understood as a physical state, from earth to clay, from wood to ash to glaze, from skin to blood, from the Northern Territory to the New South Wales and back, from desert to coast, the way that the light shifts, how temperature affects the reaction of bodies, human and otherwise. Crossing the gallery temporarily, Undaria Fence is about this movement, difficult to name, for it escapes the terms that we have at our disposal. One could imagine the word fence as a barrier, but one that exists on this corporeal level, the heart passes through with ease, for it is the heart's fence. And Undaria is located in the very centre of Australia, and so this was the reference that she was talking about. It's 130 kilometres west of Alice Springs. So this was the final installation. It's 12 metres of fence line. So from here we're going to Shepparton in the state of Victoria in Australia. Shepparton is in the Goulburn Valley, and it's a massive fruit growing area known as the Fruit Bowl of Australia. The area was once, a long time ago before European settlement, a low-lying floodplain, bordering on two sides by the Goulburn River. The damming of the Goulburn and the construction of canals and channels that crisscrossed the orchard paddocks controlled the release of water from the Goulburn River, allowing for an industrial scale agriculture. In 2017, after an extended period of research and field trips and production, I produced the work Open Bay's Central Leader of Widowmaker, which is an installation of over 150 slip casts of tree branches collected from a number of orchards, as well as from the riverbanks of the Goulburn River here in Shepparton. The installation comprises of 2 species of commercial fruit tree, apple and pear, and 1 native eucalyptus, river red gum. The apple is the yellow, straight branches at the back, the river red gum, the brown ones on the left, and the pear are the ones lying down on the top, on the ground. Together, the 3 species of tree branches exhibit pronounced difference in their form, morphological variations of branch structure, and in their wood ash glazes tell even more about the different chemical makeup of each tree species, organisms that are the product of their own environmental systems, both commercially cultivated and more or less natural. It is possible to talk about this work in different ways, chemically, aesthetically, and human interaction or intervention, all these ways having influence over each other. The shapes of the branches are traces of the growth of each species evolving under specific conditions of chemical soil composition, water availability, and presence or absence of wind. They are arms that reach from the nutritious earth towards the sun's light-giving rays. Human intervention also plays a large part in the appearance of these branches. In the case of the pear branches, from 100-year-old trees that have been cultivated and trained in a particular way to maximise commercial fruit yield. The type of cutting is called open bays, and it allows the maximum amount of sunlight to enter into the inner bowl of the tree, so that it's cut from here and these are left on the side. The gnarly appearance of the pear branches is caused by a particular method of annual pruning where they cut the long water shoots off the branches. And this has been done for so many years on these trees that they've attained a look of old bones bulging where the tree regrows over the cuts of the long water shoots, like the way a bone will create a calcium patch over its broken parts. The apple branches that I cast were planted in 1998, and they are trained to be very straight and strong foundations for the outer fruit-bearing branches. This pruning technique, which gives them the name central leaders. I was able to obtain the foundation of this tree as a whole section of the apple orchard was removed a year prior due to the lack of the popularity of these fruits on supermarket shelves. Consumer demand fell for this particular variety, which is called the Sundown Apple, as the market became swamped with new hybrid species like the Candy apple and the Jazz apple. The river red gum branches are cast from branches that I collected on the ground beneath the trees along the Goulburn River Flats, which is a floodplain area that a lot of the fruit pickers camp at when they come to itinerant fruit picking. And it's also a permanent, local residents who permanently live there in tents, and also tourists that try to look for free accommodation. This particular location has a significant history to the indigenous Yorta Yorta people who settled on the flats after the 1939 Cummeragunja walk-off. It was the first major political protest by Aboriginal people post-colonisation, who left harsh labour and living conditions on the New South Wales Cummeragunja mission. Walking across the Murray River into Victoria, they established homes on the flats, a church, a kindergarten, and their own community life. I met with Yorta Yorta elders to seek permission to collect the river red gum branches from this land. It is characteristic of eucalyptus trees to drop their branches unexpectedly, which has led to human fatalities. If you go to a campsite anywhere in Australia, you'll see a sign that says, "Don't camp under the trees," because people die. And there's a few speculated reasons why this occurs. Wood rot and disease, the drying up of sap in horizontal branches through the hot summer months, and an overexposure to water, or the control of watercourses by irrigation channels, the dams, and that changes the natural flood patterns of the edge of the watercourse, which was particularly significant on the Goulburn River. River red gums are particularly prone to dropping their branches, giving them the nickname the widowmaker. Although river red gums are not considered domesticated like the fruit tree branches, their existence and form does evolve due to human behaviour. There are many living examples of river red gum branches having been twisted and shaped into loops as young branches by Indigenous Australians. As the branches mature, they continue on this growth path to form signs in the landscape as communication markers. The final installation came from my observations during research trips to Shepparton. I started at the river, witnessing the tall gums leaching water from the river, and this led me to further investigate the importance of this river water, not only for the wild forest, but also for the fruit orchards that channeled the water for irrigation. Mixed into the history of the river and its ability to sustain the life of trees are the stories of human survival, settlement and movement. Remnants of architecture gone by, structural intrusions and objects decorate the bush along the river, where people in the past have found shelter in tin and hessian houses, and that still find shelter today in tents and haphazard camps. Open Bay's central leader, Widowmaker, like Seine River Basin, is a site-referential body of work that finds everything necessary for the making of the work at the given site. The work then points back at the location. The apple branches hold a light iron oxide, giving it its yellow colour, reflecting a light iron soil content, and the river red show a mix of manganese dioxide and iron oxide, a much deeper brown. As a part of my methodology, I have the ash of all of my projects tested by a laboratory for their metal content. I like to do this after I see the glaze results. So from the visual look of the glaze, I hypothesise possible chemical scenarios present in the trees. The soil, all the water. All three of their glazes in Open Bay's central leader, Widowmaker, show significant visual differences. Interestingly, the pear branches show a visual indicator of copper oxide, which is revealed through a glassy green hue. The chemical analysis of the ash also showed a higher level of copper in the pear ash compared to that of the other two species. As a much older orchard, 100 years compared to the apple's 20 years, the results show potential evidence of prolonged fungicidal copper spray. And it was also the case, explained to me by the orchard manager, but these pear trees were sprayed directly with copper oxide up until the 1970s in order to brown the fruit to make them cosmetically acceptable to consumers on supermarket shelves. So while this may be an example of introduced chemical influences on the environment, it is also important to look at the ways in which humans physically reshape the landscape. Consumption driving human requirements for energy systems like hydropower and mining for electricity, navigable rivers for the transportation of goods, and arable lands for food production. Take the Seine River Basin, for example. The upstream reservoirs of the Seine, Yonne, Marne and Orbe were built after the catastrophic Great Flood of 1910. Locks, canals and dredging followed for further economic venturing to the east. These physical changes control the flow of water across bedrock, manipulating the course of the river, changing the weathering of bedrock and in turn affecting the sedimentary composition of the water and the seasonal flooding of plains. Humans and rivers have an entangled and complex relationship. In 2016, I began research and collecting materials from the major river that feeds into Sydney Harbour in Australia. It's called the Parramatta River. I made several tonnes of clay from pulverised Sydney sandstone, which I collected from the massive redevelopment project of a foreshore location on the foreshore of the Sydney Harbour. And the site is now called Barangaroo Point. It's a new park and a casino. I had, at the time, become very interested in the history of salt production in New South Wales, the utilisation of sodium-rich plants by Indigenous people, the salt cooperatives of early colonial settlements along Sydney's extensive river systems, as well as pre-industrial salt evaporation furnaces. The local history of salt then fed into my research on the tradition of ceramic salt glazing, which is a technique that involves the process of a material transformation of the clay body itself, as opposed to painting on a glaze onto the clay body. So the way that salt glazing works is you throw the salt into the kiln at around 1200 degrees or higher, at which point the salt volatilizes and the sodium and the chloride split. The chloride moves around the kiln, can't attach to anything, and the sodium finds silica in the clay body, and it changes the clay from clay to clear glass. It creates sodium silicate. So instead of it being like a skin, it's actually a material transformation that happens through the rebonding of different atoms. Salt is a chemical composition essential to the existence of life. Throughout history and across human cultures, it has been a valuable resource, integral to systems of science, economics, anthropology, archaeology, geology, hydrology, spirituality, and politics. In 2017, I was invited to manifest my concept around salt at the 21st Biennale of Sydney. The work, Drowned River Valley, is an activity for the empirical and aesthetic understanding of the presence of salt in its various manifestations in and around Sydney Harbour as a core element of intersecting living systems. I collected and produced a huge volume of material components of Drowned River Valley over the course of 2 years, in fact 3 if you count the clay, but 2 years for the salt and the woods that I'll explain in a minute. And continued during the months of the Biennale on Cockatoo Island. I invited the public to participate in the production of small salt harvesting vessels made from Barangaroo sandstone clay that I was describing before, and fired on site in a purpose-built salt kiln. The salt needed for the salt firing process came from thousands of litres of Sydney Harbour water that I pumped and solar evaporated over 8 months prior to the Biennale, and during the month-long public program through a more accelerated evaporation over a steel grid furnace. So the idea was that the public would enact, I suppose, the cooperatives that used to exist in the early colony of a cooperative salt harvesting type of activity. And every week, I would, whatever was made would be fired in the kiln, and then added to an expanding installation of pieces in a different location on the top of Cockatoo Island, which is in the middle of Sydney Harbour. Until about 500, there was exactly 576 to fit the grates. There was more than that made, but that's what went into the work in the end. Exhibited alongside those salt cups were a large collection of slip-cast ceramic objects sealed with wood ash glazes of two quite different salt-related origins. A large quantity of rotted antique turpentine wharf that was donated to the project by Cockatoo Island, and tons of mangrove wood, which you see in this picture, which I collected in collaboration with local councils that were regenerating the river's edges. The ecology of the Parramatta River was greatly altered after the settlement of Europeans in 1788. To look at today, most of its riverbanks are covered in mangrove, which was not like this earlier. Salt marsh ecosystems used to also share the riverbanks, but as the river became heavily industrialised and through centuries of sprawling urbanisation, under that pressure and increased pollution levels, the very fragile ecosystem of salt marsh country began to diminish and mangroves encroached. In 1992, salt marsh was declared an endangered ecosystem along the Parramatta River. So these are slip-cast versions of the replicas of the mangrove branches, which have been glazed in their ash. The aesthetic components, the colour and the texture of the glaze expresses the chemical composition of the physical environment of the material's origins. And in the case of the brown turpentine wharf glaze, this speaks of the accumulation of over 2 centuries of zinc oxide from the anti-corrosive boats, the anti-corrosive paint for boats, and also copper and chromium, which is used in anti-foul treatments also for the hulls of boats. So if you imagine painting boats and it dropping directly onto the wharf, this is what was contained in these the ashes of this wood, which gave it this rich brown colour. As I mentioned earlier, if you add a lot of zinc to a chromium glaze, it turns chromium from green into brown. Drowned River Valley is the result of a long period of research and material collection and processing, and the invested individuality of hundreds of Sydney residents and visitors that participated in the long-month cooperative salt harvesting operation to enact the salt harvesting operations along the Parramatta River of the early European colony of New South Wales. The next place we're going to is Tasmania.
The idea of building a power scheme on Tasmania's wild west coast rivers has been around for 100 years. But it was not until the 1980s that the Hydroelectric Commission of Tasmania completed the Pilot River Power Development, one of the largest civil engineering projects ever undertaken in Australia. The 2,700 square kilometre catchment area extends east to the Cradle Mountain Lake St Clair National Park. It has an annual rainfall of 2.5 metres. The project would begin with 2 dams on the Pyman's major tributaries, the Macintosh and the Murchison.
So this is another example of a radical human intervention into a hydrological system that can be seen here at the site of the Pyman River on the west coast of Tasmania, Australia. In 1986, the Tasmanian government finished the construction of the final dam on the Pyman River hydroelectric scheme. Reese's Dam would hold back the waters of the man-made reservoir Lake Pyman. When plans to dam the Pyman were made in 1971, the Tasmanian government opened up the Pyman River Valley to loggers to try to remove and collect as much timber as possible before they would need to flood the valley. However, the area proved to be too inaccessible and too expensive an operation to make viable, and so the ancient forest was flooded at the completion of the dam. 40 years later, and the company Hydrowood developed the underwater forestry technology to return to Lake Hyman, and since 2010 have been pulling out trees, these ancient trees of Huon pine, celery top pine, sassafras, blackwoods, and Tasmanian oak that remain beneath the surface of the lake. The combination of extremely low water temperature, low light levels due to the black tannin-rich waters, and the replacement of the tree's sap with water has preserved the forest timber in suspension. Earlier this year, Hydrowood donated some of their milled offcuts of celery top pine and Tasmanian oak to my project Lower Pyman. The whole installation included a video work, a Hydrowood stool, some photo-printed souvenir mugs, and twin stumps, which are these ceramic forms. They're cast from anonymous driftwood stumps that I collected from the banks of the Lake Hyman. The matching forms host the two types of Hydrowood glazes, celery top pine and Tasmanian oak. The celery top pine is this pinkish purple glaze, which, as soon as I saw it, reminded me of manganese dioxide glaze. When you mix manganese dioxide with high levels of potassium and low levels of alumina in a glaze, you get this colour. And the chemical of the analysis of the ash from the lab indeed revealed high levels of potassium and low levels of alumina compared to that of the Tasmanian oak twin. It also showed high levels of manganese dioxide, higher levels than iron oxide anyway, which is usually really dominates terrestrial plants because it's so ubiquitous in bedrock. This area of the island of Tasmania is infamously known for forestry and mining. The waters of the Pyman River have acted as a receiving environment for discharge of wastewater from mining operations for over a century. Since the creation of the lake reservoirs, mining discharges and are maintained for longer periods in a lake environment. In 2008, residents of the town of Rosebery that sits adjacent to Lake Pyman confronted the upstream mining company, Oz Minerals, over the heavy metal contamination of water in their town. They believed it to be results of tailings from the Oz Mineral tin mine upstream. Blood tests of Rosebery residents showed 3 times the amount of normal levels of manganese dioxide in their blood. During October and November in 2018, I undertook a residency in Sichuan province in southwest China to produce a new work for Cosmopolis 1.5, Enlarged Intelligence. My studio, as I mentioned earlier, was an industrial ceramics factory in Wuchenzhen in the agricultural and industrial lands of the Chengdu Plain. The site is geologically situated in the Sichuan Red Basin, a name given to it by its iron-rich red sandstone and clay soils. I worked from the factory, ate at the factory canteen, and lived in an apartment for factory workers. It's just behind the mountain of plaster molds. And the image on the right is fields of green tea, and in the background there you'll see is a very tall eucalyptus tree. Around the factory were these farms of green tea, but on arrival I noticed the plantations of flooded gum. It's also known as rose gum, a species of eucalyptus native to Australia. These eucalyptuses are planted along roadsides and around farming land, bordering the fields of green tea. Eucalyptus plantations in China were implemented as a measure to rehabilitate forests and stabilise soil erosion, while also providing a revenue stream, harvested for lumber and paper pulp. The flooded gums were planted because of their fast-growing qualities, aiding rapid economic turnover. However, they are also voracious water consumers, taking water and nutrients from neighbouring green tea plantations, and as an introduced monoculture, have had adverse effects on the local ecosystem. When eucalyptuses are planted in a monoculture, they decrease the soil pH, increasing acidity, which allows alumina to become soluble. When alumina ions are present in excess, it becomes detrimental to other floras in that location. This is the green tea ash glaze on one of the small little cups made by factory workers at GIG. The green tea ash lab results showed extremely high levels of alumina. So here we could see an example of changing soil chemistry due to human disruption of an ecosystem through introduced species. I was fortunate enough to find some extremely friendly farmers who gave me their perspective on the flooded gums. From our conversations, I understood that the quality of the green tea produced near the eucalyptus or in soil where the eucalyptus once stood has severely diminished. They believe the eucalyptus to be poisonous and have ceased planting the trees. This is the ash glaze of the eucalyptus. My overall research for this project included 3 separate site-derived ash glazes from green tea wood, bamboo and flooded gum. This was to investigate the social and ecological relationships between the plants, soil, water and the local community. The research is ongoing for my China project. After the experience, I'm particularly interested in investigating the use of different fertilisers and pesticides on Chinese green tea and in agricultural practices broadly. This is also a major aspect of my research for the Seine River Basin, which I will continue to explore. Different organic and inorganic fertilisers and pesticides contain varying levels of heavy metals, such as cadmium, cobalt, copper, iron, manganese, arsenic, chromium, lead, mercury, nickel, and vanadium. These elements are naturally occurring in the environment, and of course they remain in the products developed by humans to manage mass food production, such as fertilisers and pesticides. So the abundance of these elements in soil compositions can be unnaturally high in places where repetitive agricultural applications. Plants intake this and rain washes this into waterways. So this is those projects that I've just described, plus Seine River Basin. These are the lab ash analyses of all of those projects. So this kind of chart, I hope to be a companion to the glaze projects, so it can be read in correlation with one another, and a kind of a narrative can be put together based on the 2 different types of information gathering. Across the wall of the Seine River Basin, you see a foundation of orange and peach colours. And to look at it, I'd say that this is iron oxide mixed with other opacifiers like titanium, lead or barium. There is a strong geological and hydrological correlation between each of these sites, as they are only 50 kilometres away from each other. There was the Seine willow, which is the 5 branches on the left. They came from the convergence of the Yonne and the Seine. And then you've got 5 or 6 from the River Marne, which was also a willow tree. Then there's a collection of branches that were floating in the River Seine. And then the last 4 branches from the St. Denis Canal. And through this coloration, there's sort of degrees and gradients, there's nuances in the colour that could tell different chemical narratives. For example, the ash results show higher levels of strontium in the St. Denis Canal woods compared to the other Seine River Basin woods. Strontium is a chemical component of cement, and strontium makes glaze colours more vivid and matte. There are also flashes of green in the Marne woods, which would to me indicate copper oxide. The ash results do show that the Marne willow hosts a higher amount of copper oxide compared to the rest of the other woods. So whilst Seine River Basin is a finished display of objects here, it is also a trajectory for me to continue investigating, to look more deeply into the glazes and the ash analysis, the human histories of the Seine River Basin, to explore possible narratives of the place. It is also a new record to add to the archive, to understand and share knowledge of the world in this alternative way. I'm fascinated with glazes and their geochemical relationship to location and people. The glazes that I have produced in the past and for this project shift from being something protective to seal the porous ceramic surface for human utility or decoration, carriers of colour and design for aesthetic purposes, to something that is self-referential and self-analytical. The reproduction of the original form of the branch points towards itself in a way that we are familiar with from looking at the trees themselves. But the glazes reveal more about the tree than we can see with our own eyes. The symmetrical repetition of this work gives the feeling of looking at the reflection of the tree on a body of water, as the glazes reflect the memory of the tree, of the specific combination of human and environmental conditions that have nourished it over its lifetime. Thank you. Any questions for Rita?
Thank you very much, Yasmin. I had a quick question about, there was one project where you had the public get involved and make the bowls.
Yeah.
Is that something you've thought about doing in other projects? Is it like the kind of public engagement, or is it kind of a one-off on the circumstances of that one?
So there was, I have done other public engagement projects in the past. That one, the two that I referred to here was for Drowned River Valley, which was the one for the Sydney Biennale, and then also for Cosmopolis 1.5, that also included public participation. It's definitely something that I look into the possibility of doing at any location that I can, if I have the materials and the work calls for it. So, I guess in many ways it needs to kind of be conceptually linked to the project as well, rather than just a token gesture. But it's often there are ways to weed in, and it's a good way to actually get communicate with the community, because they'd be interested in what I'm doing, but I'm also interested in their perspectives of the places that they live as well.
Thank you. I would like to know which relation do you do with your own work and the title "The Colonial Ecology," which was I think the subject of
decolonial ecology.
Yeah.
How that relates to my work.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about this myself today, because I think that in reference to my work, the elements existed before colonisation. So we're really revealing something that is pre-human. And also the effect in many places, and I can really only speak for colonisation in the place that I live. Actually, I don't have enough experience from other places, but the way that it affects changing ecology, my work just looks at, I guess it looks at the repercussions of that in a lot of ways. So whether it's decolonising ecology, or if it's just sharing knowledge about what has happened in many places since colonisation, which in itself might be decolonising ecology. I don't know. Yeah.
Another question?
I'll just come in with a comment to continue a conversation we've had, and also to join this discussion here, which is that for me, part of what Yasmin is doing so concretely in her work is to make accessible the memory of a plant, so how a plant has absorbed and maintained within it elements from its environment, which she has found, developed this methodology in order to make visible and accessible to us as the human community who have in general not treated the plant world as though they perceived the world, recorded the world, had memory, and that this is not, that dialogue is not something that in European and North American scientific discourse has been brought to the fore, but that on the other hand exists very strongly in many other worldviews and systems of explaining the relationship between all things, living, non-living, human, non-human. So I think there's a kind of broader envelope as well for that relationship with the notion of decolonial ecology, of how do you change the point of reference. So does anyone else have any questions? Otherwise, would you join me in thanking Yasmin very, very much for that beautiful talk tonight?
Thank you all for coming.